Yeah. What is up, brother? Well, welcome to the REI 101 show. I'm your friend Austin. This is my friend Albert. Alberto, how's it going, man? Let me get some of this music going. Tell me about it. What are you learning right now?
Um, about more about new construction, ground up construction, and some kind of rule of thumb numbers about buying land and what your build cost should be and things like that. So I learned
No,
something new today.
no regrets yet?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet.
Man, you picked a really interesting time to do focus on new construction. But one thing, tell me if you're seeing something different. So we're in a situation right now. It's the last day of June. It's the last day of the second quarter, 2025. Market has, by most people's standards, is not favorable in real estate, which is fine because we know in unfavorable markets, that's when the winners show up. That's when highly successful investors really do business. My question in regards to new construction, are you seeing a trend of new construction sales performing better despite the fact that the rest of the market may not be? Because I've heard that from several sources.
I think it's still area dependent. Depending on the area of Houston, like some areas that have higher inventory of new construction. I think if you're priced appropriately, you can still
Hmm.
sell pretty quick. Also, design has something to do with
Hmm.
it as well, because if you're in an area where they're doing a lot of new construction and your property looks, your house looks like everybody else's house, then it may sit on the
Yeah.
market a little longer unless you price it, a lot lower, right?
Yeah.
But if you come in and maybe you add an extra bathroom or maybe your design and your finishes will make your property stand out, from these other properties, then I think you can sell for a good price. But like for instance, when we're building in South Union, we've seen properties fly off the market in 10 days.
Hmm.
We've seen some properties stay on the market for 90 days. Okay.
Yeah.
We're picking up some lots in Edo pretty soon
Hmm.
here and looking at days on market there. I've seen properties sit on the market for over a year. But when I
Yeah.
look at the list price,
Yeah.
it's like $80,000 more than what they're currently listed at.
Yeah.
So, that's one of the pitfalls of overpricing your property is it can sit for a really long time,
Yeah.
and that just really creates a whole host of other issues. Like people look at that property as a problem, what's wrong with it, and then they'll go look elsewhere. But I'm just kind of seeing it all over the place, Austin, to be honest. But I'd rather, from a builder's perspective, we are encountering far fewer problems building than we do
Hmm.
when we're rehabbing.
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
that's been a plus.
That's an interesting perspective. And yes, the pricing is critical. We've been running the numbers. I ran the numbers for May. I'll have an update for June today or tomorrow. But it seems to be like single family homes that sit like a day 30, day 31. Homes are losing about $30,000 in value. The average sales price of single family homes at day 31 is about $30,000 less than homes that sell from day 0 to 30. So true stuff right there. So we're going to be talking about property management today, and this is another topic that I'm sure is right up your alley right now. Um, we do we don't do the property management side, but we do the lease listing side. So we'll do that for clients. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background in property management? Maybe what are you managing? Because I know you have your own properties you manage, and then you also
Yeah,
manage properties for other people. But
right.
we really need to talk about also is outsourcing property management to somebody else, which may or may not be you, or there's different property managers for different purposes.
Yeah. So all the properties, well, the majority of the properties we manage are going to be single families. We
Hmm.
manage a boutique hotel, so we manage long-term rentals, we our own, and for other investors, we also manage our own short-term vacation rentals for ourselves and for investors as well. So we created a property management company, We don't necessarily have a marketing budget or things like that. We're just kind of grassroots, like word of mouth kind of marketing, getting it out there on the job that we do.
Hmm.
So, that business is growing. It's grown a lot over the past year, and we've learned a lot over the past year. But I think that, from my opinion, if you have the time as an investor, I think it is a good idea to at least self-manage to start with. So you
Right.
really get an idea of what's entailed, right? It's
Hmm.
almost like learning the process before you go hire it out. Some people, they just hire it out immediately.
Right.
And we can talk about like the kind of like the pros and cons and underwriting, that in the beginning and what that looks like. We can talk about that a little bit later. But um, and then you've got commercial property management too, Austin, which you may be
Hmm.
familiar with. You guys aren't doing it, but I'm pretty sure that you have contacts, commercial property managers, and there may even be some brokerages that do commercial
Yeah.
property management too. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also important to notice that that's not the same thing as leasing or listing the properties that are for leased. So a lot of property managers will do both. They'll list them for lease. So you got to kind of ask yourself like, okay, do I want a full service where the property manager handles the lease listing, in commercial, especially with bigger properties. The bigger the property, the more likely, or the bigger the portfolio, the more likely you're going to want a property manager. If you just have one single family house, property managers are usually going to charge, I don't know, the rates around like 10 to 12% of the rent,
Yeah.
depending. And what we found, a lot of property managers that handle single family homes, they won't even touch anything if it's like less than $2,000 a month. They won't even. So if you have like a small single family rental that's renting for $1,200 a month, there may not be a property manager that will even do that job, you
Yeah,
know?
not a large property manager, but like smaller property management companies like ourselves, we may take on that client. And really we're taking on clients that we know. Like I mentioned
Hmm.
before, it's just through word of mouth. Julia has her license, so she has the right to the ability to property manage, list the property, go through the lease, go through the rental application verification, write up the leases and then collect rent and distribute things like that. So, we handle all of that for our
Yeah,
clients.
no,
Yeah.
that's good. So what are some reasons? Let's review. What are some of the reasons why somebody may want to manage their own property? What are the benefits of managing their own property?
Well, one of the reasons, and it's not a very good reason, but one of the reasons why they might want to self-manage is because they just want to save that money,
Hmm.
and that is one of the ways the property cash flows. But from an underwriting perspective, if you're focused on cash flow, if the property cash flows with a property manager, then but you still plan to manage it, in the beginning, that is a better property than one that may not cash flow with a property manager. Because you may go into these projects or to, underwriting the saying, hey, I'm going to property manage at least the first five. But if it doesn't make money or doesn't cash flow with a property
Yeah,
manager, you eventually plan to hand these off anyway, then, you may be losing some money in the short term. You may be losing
yeah.
some on the
No,
cash.
that's a very good point, and we've seen a lot of property owners with multifamilies and RV parks, especially, kind of digging themselves in a little bit of a hole because on paper they may have a business that's profitable. They may have a business that has a decent cap rate, but when buyers are looking at these properties, the first question they look at these financial statements on these, like self-storage is another good example. They'll look at these and they'll say, um, who manages the property? Well, the owner does. Well, in that case, the owner is not just selling an asset, the owner is also selling a job. And
Right.
not, a lot of us are getting into real estate not because we want more work, it's because we want more freedom. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. Really good point. With the larger properties, multifamilies, like 20, 30, 40 units or more, um, I'm finding that the cost of management is usually around 8%. And there's a lot of really creative ways that you can handle that. So we have a lot of multifamilies
Hmm.
where the management is like part like tenant management. Have you seen that where the tenant gets like a discount on the rent
Right.
and in lieu
It's
of
like a
the
barter system a little
yeah
bit.
artist?
Mhm.
There's pros and cons to that, but at the end of the day, you've got to be able to show property management cost and the maximum amount of income that the property is able to produce.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
So what about what are the pros and cons of outsourcing property management? I mean, we kind of hit on that, but
Yeah, I mean, I think once you grow to a certain portfolio, or if your schedule just doesn't, accommodate you doing self-management, then obviously you can outsource these things. And we kind of
Mhm,
talked about a lot of those like kind of price points of where that's going to be if you have one property, if you have 20. you know but like for me, as our business grows, I'm going to outsource a lot of my processes to VAs, right?
mhm,
So those VAs will like be a part of my company, so I'm outsourcing a part of the property management to those people. We have handymen, right, that are out in different areas, whether it's Houston or Galveston area. So I'm kind of outsourcing that portion of the property management, because those are services that we provide to our clients. Is if they can't find a handyman or they don't have one, we can provide some contacts for those too. So, I'm not out there like changing toilets and things like that. We'll outsource that as well. So I want this to eventually be like where my job is just to get more clients, but as we outsource that property management to VAs, my workload is not going to go up,
right.
as our clients, improve. But like we mentioned already before, you got the cost benefit of doing it yourself, or paying that property manager. The property manager too that you decide to hire is probably a more professional person
Mhm,
that has experience and's probably seen it in a little bit more different types of tenants. They have a better way of screening tenants and things like that because they're going to do it in a professional manner, as opposed to you,
right.
who you may just be a little mom and pop, one or two properties. You may not have any processes in place, and you can kind of get in trouble there too, especially when it comes to
Yeah.
screening tenants.
Yeah. So that's a good segue to our next segment about
Mhm.
like really just connecting with like maintenance workers, collecting rent, emergency calls. So let's talk about maintenance first. So you have properties all over the place.
Mhm.
And do you wait until something happens and then get connected with the right contractor, or do you have contractors that are on call, or they're just like, do you pick up a property and let your contractors know, hey, I got this new property. Just don't be surprised if I call you out of the
Yeah.
blue to unclog the
So,
toilet.
I mean, the way that we handle it, I mean, and this is just the system that we follow, Austin, is, if we're going to buy a property and it needs work, we're going to fix everything up front.
Hmm.
We're going to replace the roof if it needs to be replaced or if it's older. We're going to replace the HVAC if it's, maybe 12 to 15 years old, right? Maybe
Hmm.
10, we might replace it still. We're going to update the plumbing. We're going to make sure electrical panel is up to code. We're going to fix all the holes in the walls. Like, we're just going to come in and do a complete remodel, because what we want to do is we want to take care of all that maintenance and repairs up front. So when we do place a tenant into this property, it's less probable that they're going to experience a problem. So
Right.
that's what we take care of all up front. Now, do things happen? Of course, right?
Yeah.
Drains get clogged. We do regular fall and spring maintenance. So we have a HVAC company that maintenances all of our properties, or the majority of them. And the unit can be brand new. We're still going to
Hmm.
do those maintenances, where they check the drain pan, all those things, right, that they do. And then we have a handyman that's on call. May not necessarily be on call within an hour, but within 24 hours. And we put that in
Okay.
our lease agreements, right? Here's what to expect if you have a maintenance call. Like, we're going to reply
Okay.
to that within 24 hours, and could take us, depending on the issue, up to 3 to 5 days to get it fixed, right? And being in Houston or the Houston area, there are things that require more emergency response, like AC problems, right? Or if you have a leak that's, impacting, the usability of the house, or electrical problem that's
Yeah.
unsafe, right? Those are things that we're going to call people out for ASAP. We're going
Right.
to pay that emergency maintenance request to have people out there, for those things. But other things, like maybe there's some chipped paint or a small hole in the sheetrock, or maybe there's something going on with the
Yeah.
siding or something outside, those things will take our handyman out there, and they usually get those things done in 3 to 5 days.
Okay. So
Yeah.
being clear with, so you have that in writing. If it's an emergency, we'll respond right away. If it's
Yeah.
not, it can be 24 to 72 hours.
Right.
Um, I think, working with a lot of investors, we got people that are like kind of dipping their toe in the water and they're not really sure if they want to get in. One of the biggest objections I get to buying real estate is this is especially like from the spouse of the investor. Like you always kind of have one that's more motivated to get into it and the other that's a little more reluctant. So, but the big objection is I don't want to be up in the middle of the night unclogging toilets. There's certain safeguards that we put in place. Like for instance, we charge a trip fee. I'm sure you have that as well. What measures have you found kind of reduces like the nonsense house calls? Because some people they'll call you for things that are just not necessary.
Yeah, I mean, so like again, we set the expectations up front with our renters, and we're doing all that maintenance and repairs up front as well, like I just described. But we set expectations up front and we just let them know what their responsibilities are and what our responsibilities are. What's going to be an emergency call, like you can call us if it's in the middle of the night, but we're not
Hmm.
going to leave where we're at in the middle of the night to address that. It's going to be during regular business hours. Or if it's after hours, of course, we're willing to go there after hours, but we're not going to be going there at 2 o'clock in the morning. We set those expectations up front. Now, of course, if there's a safety or structural problem, call 911. Like, people just need to use common sense. But we set
Right.
those expectations up front.
That's
So,
good.
yeah. And so, like, yeah, we have, I think, maybe almost 20 units, ours and investors that I manage. I don't get calls in the middle of the night. We've
Yeah.
been doing it for 5 years. So people that are afraid and they're sitting on the sidelines because of that particular reason, they're
Right.
missing out on they're missing out
Yeah.
on those investments.
I love that. No, that's important to hear. You got to you got to set the expectation up front. You got to have a good system process in place. That's good. And then when something does happen, you have a process to act on it.
Hmm.
Talk about collecting rent. So Um, I still have person in my family that has a lot of properties, but she's kind of old school. And so she goes to the property and knocks on the door and collects the checks. And she's been doing that for decades. You know,
Hmm.
Probably most people would agree that's not the most practical approach to it. What are some of the systems and tools that you're using right
So
now
our
to?
most Yeah, our most important tool managing our long-term rentals is an application called Rent Ready.
Hmm.
There's another one out there called Turbo Tenant as well. It does the same thing, very similar. What we like about those systems is it's an ecosystem that your renter gets entered into from the very beginning when they just want to view the property.
Okay.
So, for instance, if they're coming through with a real estate agent, then we're talking with the real estate agent to make sure these people are qualified to come look at the property because we have minimum requirements for the application, like minimum credit score, no evictions, no bankruptcies, no violent felonies. Verifiable income that's like 2.5 to 3 times the rent. Like those things are set up front in the listing description. So people
Yeah.
know this is what's required,
Yeah.
right? But let's say they're not represented, they go directly to Julia. She sends them a pre-qualification link through Rent Ready. They fill out this information and they get inserted into this Rent Ready ecosystem. And they
Okay.
go through that system. So if they're pre-qualified and they pass that, great. We show them the property. They want to fill out application. We send them the Rent Ready application. They fill out the application. It gets uploaded with all of their information into Rent Ready. Rent Ready
Right.
does the background check and it does the credit check. And then we're able to verify all of that there. And if we accept them as a renter, they then become a prospect and they become a tenant of a particular property. And then we add all of the rent, the deposits. They can pay all that stuff through there. They can even sign up for renter's insurance through there as well. All of the late fee configurations are through there as well. So all of that's automatic. They can pay through ACH. We can pay with a credit card. We don't take cash. We don't take any other kind of electric e-payments. We
Right.
make it go through this system so it's easy to track and it's all verifiable. So Rent Ready does a verification of their ACH bank
Yeah.
account. For instance, it has to be in the name of the renter. They can't use somebody else's bank account to help prevent fraud. That's our primary tool. It does everything. We can even list the property through Rent Ready if we want, but we utilize Julia to do that to list it on her.
We haven't used Rent Ready, but we use my Smart Move for the background checks, and then we
Yeah,
use the
yeah, I know.
Trek
Yeah,
forms of the applications.
yeah. But that one application is just a game changer for us. You know,
Yeah.
that's how
No,
we
that's
manage
good.
all of our
So
properties.
that's Rent Ready. Let me ask you this: what and I want to be careful when I'm asking this question that I don't put my foot in my mouth. But what are some of the reasons that you may disqualify a tenant?
So, like one of the primary reasons is a low credit score. So there are credit scores that, like, we would work with someone with a low credit score, and I communicate this to people if they're looking at the property. You know, I'm kind of reiterating here are the requirements, but I let them know like not everyone has a great credit score. You know, bad
Hmm.
things happen to some people. People lose jobs, they go through divorce and things like that in their past can impact their credit. So what we do is that's one thing that can disqualify someone right away. But we tell people, look, if your credit score is less than what the requirement is, you do have to upload bank statements. If you have a consistent cash balance in your bank account, basically you're not living paycheck to paycheck, then
Right.
we could make an exception to that credit score. You know, there can't be any bankruptcies and no prior evictions as well. So those things are immediately like they're just not going to move past if they have any bankruptcies or evictions. We it does a background check, so we look at violent felonies,
Yeah.
other types of misdemeanors and things like that. You know, those are going to come back. We'll talk to the renters about that, kind of get their side of the story as well. But sometimes we can work through those as well. But we let people know this stuff up front because they have to
Hmm.
pay like a $45
Yeah.
application fee. So we let them know like, hey, this is what we're looking for. Here's the exceptions we can make.
Yeah.
Here's where we cannot make exceptions. You
Yeah.
know,
And if those issues pop up on this background check, you're going to be out $40. That's on
exactly,
you. So
exactly.
if you know you have that violent felony, another
This
one
probably
is
isn't a place for you.
yeah,
Yeah,
or drug possession with intent to sell
yeah.
specifically, I think is one that a lot of people use. Um, yeah, low credit evictions have been a tough one. People try to hide that from
Right.
us. Um, I think one time we had someone say their whole report was clean and clear, and they had a kidnapping on their record when we pulled their record. So
Austin, that like, I've got a story for you real quick. Like people steal other people's identities, like we dealt with that when we're managing property for a friend in Houston. This person went, filled out the application, came back, everything was like the credit score was good. No, nothing on the background. They supplied their ID, with their picture, their name, and everything because they have to upload a photo. But one thing on their credit report that showed up, it just said that their address was a mismatch. Now, sometimes that's not really, that big of a deal, but it does tell you, hey, this address that they provided is different from the last known address that the credit bureau had.
mm,
And like if it's in Houston and things like that, I'm just looking at it and just double checking it. But the credit bureau was putting an address in Kentucky, and
wow.
they were saying they were moving from San Antonio. And the credit bureau also puts all of their previous addresses, and all their previous addresses were in Kentucky. So that was a little bit of a red flag. So, me being an investor, I actually skip traced the Kentucky address and came back with a different phone number of the landlord than what they used. I called that person. It was actually the owner. It was actually the person that they were trying to steal their identity. That's who I got in contact with. So like,
Whoa.
yeah, super crazy, man. So you really have to, you just can't do like this surface level verification. Like you really kind of have to do like some Sherlock Holmes
Yeah,
detective work sometimes.
Alberto's on the case, man. So you
Yeah.
uncovered. So what happened to that tenant, that John
Well,
Doe
we just,
tenant?
we just immediately rejected the application, and then we did tell that person like, hey, there's somebody over here in Houston trying to use your identity, And they wanted us to do a bunch of other stuff too, which, we're just like, hey, we'll forward this on to the city of
Yeah,
Houston
that's not your
Police
job.
Department. Whatever they want to do, then, you'll have to take care of that stuff, right?
Probably smart.
Yeah.
So, so we've had a lot of stories like this. Like one of the dumbest mistakes that I ever made, and I paid for this out of my pocket, was I allowed, and I didn't give her the key, but
Hmm.
the owner gave the tenant the key before we got paid.
Oh, yeah.
Ask me if we ever got paid. Never. She never paid
Yeah.
her rent, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so these are all the different type of issues. There are going to be red flags that pop up. Take those red flags very seriously because there is a chance you may be dealing with a fraud. There may be a chance that you're dealing with somebody who was involved in the kidnapping. But you know what I find is one of the biggest challenges in the leasing world is pets.
Hmm.
Pets seem to be, and for every lease we have, pets are such a challenge for both the tenants and the owners of these properties. Are you seeing the same thing? Like we got an application on a property today, and there was uh, the owner owned two Rottweilers.
Oh, yeah. That's
You
that's
know,
that's rough. Yeah.
insurance
Yeah.
not even going to allow an animal like that in
Yeah,
a
so
house.
we've got, we allow pets on a case by case basis, right? Depending on the breed, the age, the size, like those things. If it's an aggressive breed, or a heavy dog or a larger animal, like those, they're just going to probably do some damage to your property,
Hmm.
right? You
Hmm.
can ask for pet fees, pet deposits, or maybe additional pet rent. You can do all that stuff, but at the end of the day, you're not really going to be collecting thousands of dollars that this pet can do damage on your property,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
you're just kind of chasing after the renter after they move out, right? You're never going to get that money. So, we have allowed pets, in our properties with a non-refundable pet fee, and we've been pretty lucky so far. That we haven't had any damage whatsoever of any pets. But one of the things too that I see are illegal pets is
Hmm.
basically after the renter moves in, and we do quarterly inspections of our properties. So we come in and we're responsible for replacing the HVAC vents. I'm sorry, the filters, because we don't really depend on our renters to take care of that. Because if we do leave it with them, they're never going to do it. So
Right.
we go in every quarter to take a look at properties, and I found like they have a dog that wasn't,
Yeah.
approved, right?
Right.
And that can be like a tense situation because they're going to give you every reason why they didn't tell you ahead of time,
Yeah.
right? But then you just have to handle it tactfully and not feel like it's a personal attack on like your prop because it is your house. I
Yeah.
do feel really kind of defensive about it sometimes when people are doing things in the house that they're not allowed to do,
Yeah.
but handle it in a professional way. And then, we ended up collecting the pet fee anyway on that. But the renter was kind of upset with us for whatever
Yeah.
reason that we found the pet. I'm like, well, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was in writing. Christian said pets are a must. You're going to lose about 80%. That's true. So I would say that if you're totally against pets, maybe give it 30 days. And if you're not getting traction, because there's so many different things that have to line up for a good tenant to be in place. You may
Hmm.
have somebody with a perfect credit score. You may have somebody that can double up their deposits. You may have like the perfect tenant, except for they have a Great Dane or a larger dog. So you got to make a decision there. Some people do case by case. I think it's better just to have it in writing.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
a maximum of two pets, no animals over 40 pounds.
Yeah.
Some people favor dogs over cats or whatever, so just have
Hmm.
some clarity about that. Um, there's one other challenge that I haven't mentioned, and I think it's worth mentioning, is smoking.
Hmm.
We had a kind of a higher end, like $3,000 or $4,000 lease where the tenants were smoking in the house, and there was nothing in the contract that forbade them from
Oh,
smoking,
really?
and it was tens of thousands of dollars of remediation to get rid of the smoking smell. And you could still smell the cigarette smoke. So really make sure you put no smoking. Smoking, though, that's more than just a deposit that you're going to forfeit. You're going to get sued. You're going to be expected to cover the cost of the remediation.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
we have that in our lease agreements. No smoking inside the house or any part of the house. Like and that, so when we put any part of the house, so that's like including inside the garage.
yeah.
People are free to smoke. If they do smoke, they can smoke outside.
I would also say, as far as screening and retention, fair housing laws are very, very serious. There's lots of lawsuits going on about fair housing laws. So, depending on the market you're in, make sure you know the your local laws and their state and federal laws as well.
Hmm.
You got to be real careful with discrimination in providing adequate housing. Um, so, learn those. We're not going to go into that too much, but um, check references. That's a huge one.
Hmm.
Check references or have somebody.
Yeah, don't skip out on that. Just because everything looks good on paper, especially with the prevalence of chat GPT and AI, people can make fake references. They can create fake paycheck stubs. Like I told you before, I go one step further. If they're giving me where they live and it's like a home, a house,
Mhm.
I'm skip tracing the house.
Yeah,
I'm skip tracing and I want to find that owner's name and that owner's phone number to make sure it matches up with what they put in the application because they can give you a fake landlord that can give them a good reference you
yeah,
know um different price points you may see less of that, but again, just really do your due diligence there because
yeah.
I mean we've had to evict people before. That particular instance, it wasn't that big of a deal. They were in and out, like they didn't do any damage, they just left, so that was good, but it doesn't always
Mhm.
work out that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, a lot of people will incriminate themselves extremely bad on social media. You can
Yeah,
Facebook stalk them, and people will. Yeah, you'll realize that
yeah,
that's probably not the kind of person you want living in your home.
exactly.
So, anything else as far as screening, managing, asset managing, collecting payment, handling tenants?
So, we didn't talk about like retention tips, like
Yeah,
keeping your renters and having them
good.
renew, because at the end of the day, like it would be awesome if somebody stayed there for 30 years, right? And paid your whole
Yeah.
mortgage down. But we do send after the first year, if they renew, and in the second year, we do send them Starbucks gift cards and things like that on birthdays.
Oh,
We're
good.
also fair, like with the market on rent increases. Like
Hmm.
we don't want to go up more than $100 per renewal. We just take a look at everything and we take a look at what's comparable in the area. People don't like to move, right?
You're right.
Period, right? Especially they get comfortable. They don't like to move. But if you increase the rent too much, they will move.
Yeah.
So when you have a good renter, I think it does a disservice if you never raise the rent. It's just really going to hurt you in the end, and it's going to
Yeah.
hurt the like the resale value of your property if you're selling
Yeah.
it to, like, let's say you have a duplex or something like that, you're going to sell to another investor and you never went up on the rent, like that's going to hurt you long term. So we do go through those increases, but at the end of the day, like I'm not getting rich off of one rental. It's an accumulation of all
You're
these
right.
rentals that we're building wealth. So going up like 50, $75, $100 per unit per year, I mean, over 5, 10 years, like you're gonna really increase your cash flow. So just be fair. We're compassionate to our renters as well. Try to understand their situation and understand like what's the market like down there.
Right.
If the rents are flat, like we might go up like $25 or something, right? Just to account for maybe increase in taxes and insurance.
Are you normally doing 12 monthly on the longer term leases? Are you normally doing 12?
Yeah, we normally do 12. We have had a couple tenants that did a 2-year lease, and we have somebody do like a 15-month lease. Those were some students in Galveston. They
Yeah.
wanted their lease to just kind of coincide with their school term at the hospital at UTMB. So that was like a 15-month lease.
I'm seeing more interest in like midterm rentals, especially in medical communities and student communities. They're coming in and doing like 90-day leases or 30-day
Mhm.
leases. So
Yeah, that's
typically
really
you can,
popular, really, really popular in Houston, like near the
yeah,
medical center.
you can charge a premium on the lease. They'll pay a little bit more, and
Hmm.
then they just won't be there.
Yeah. And most of the
as
time,
long.
those are going to be furnished properties too. Those are going to be furnished units. You're paying the
Hmm.
utilities and things like that because people are just kind of going in for a month, 2 months, 3 months, maybe 6 months, right? So they just need a place to stay for a project, or maybe they're doing a work deal, or it could be a traveling nurse, or it could be a family. Maybe they have a family member that's getting cancer treatments and things like that, and they want to be there for them for that entire period. Maybe it's like 3 month,
Yeah,
treatment. It beats having to stay like in a hotel or something like that and
right.
kind of being cramped in when they have access to like a 3 bedroom house with a full kitchen and privacy and things like that. Then
Yeah.
those tend to do well in Houston for sure.
So for your short term, so give me an idea for like your short term vacation rentals. What's a minimum, maximum that you see on terms, and then the same for mid and long term rentals?
So like really all of our vacation rentals, they're going to go through online travel agencies like VRBO and
Hmm.
Airbnb, and those agencies are going to do their own vetting, and they've got algorithms and things like that as well to vet people like based off of the information that they provide, and they're pretty good. They sometimes we get like an inquiry from someone. They want to rent the property, and Airbnb will just shut the whole message down and say you
Right.
can't reply to this message because of specific reasons, right? So
Oh,
whatever
okay.
they found. But you can also get like these monthly rentals, like these midterm rentals. You can still go through things like Airbnb as well. You
Hmm.
can list them there. You can go through other places like Furnished Finder. You can also advertise on Facebook. I would still do the same application process to do the same vetting if you have somebody that's going to stay there for more than 30 days.
Very
Have them
good.
fill out an application and like do the same background checks and things like that as well.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, appreciate that. So we got about 7 minutes left, or 8 minutes left. Want to hear from, we got some really great people on the call today. So would really love to hear your questions. What are you learning? What are some of the tips that you've learned in the rental world, with leasing, short term, long term? What type of assets what type of rentals are you focusing on? Bonus points if you have any um, commercial leases out there. But yeah, come off mute or post in the chat box. Would love to hear your questions. Um, any experience with new construction rentals? So we see some people get into that. So you're building right now. You have any thought about holding on to the new construction and renting those out?
Eventually, yes. Yeah, eventually, yes, we will build to rent. Right now, we're just building to sell. Just because of the position we're in right now in our company, the phase that we're in. But we will eventually build to rent as well, like duplexes. Primarily, they might be things like duplexes, or maybe just anything like under 4 units, especially in Houston, because I think once you
Hmm.
get to 4 units, you have specific new commercial requirements like parking and things like that that you have to adhere to.
Yeah,
But we do manage new construction properties that one of our clients purchased. Like they purchased two duplexes that were new construction,
yeah.
in like the Sunnyside area. So I've had the opportunity along with Julia, right, to meet with these prospective tenants, and they love them, right?
Hmm.
Because now you're not showing rental like maybe you're doing for rent by owner, and you're kind of showing
Yeah,
your rehabbed house that's like 60 years old, right?
yeah.
It's gonna have its little quirks and things like that. It's gonna squeak and whatever, right? But these new construction properties, people, I think, like them more just because they're, especially if they're brand new. No one's ever lived there. They're the first renters that are there, and if you're priced appropriately, you can find really good renters for those properties. But eventually, Austin, that's what we will be doing too, is building
That's
to rent.
excellent. Yeah, we've had some clients with some success with that. They'll buy new construction or develop it, rent it out for 2 years, and then sell it for a profit. So the only
Mhm.
thing I would say that you got to be careful with um, if it's like a large community, a large development, whether you're going to lease it out or buy it. You got to be careful if you're buying at the beginning stages of it because it may take them 5 years to complete the development. And
Mm,
if you decide to sell on year 3 and they're still 60% of the way completed with the development. You're now competing with a lot of new inventory, so you may not experience um, a significant amount of appreciation in that situation. But yeah, so it, we are seeing, Hitchcock is an interesting market because we're seeing like these little tiny communities pop up, and they're just purely rental communities, and there are investors that we're finding is they're doing that. They're building like little townhouse communities, duplex communities, and immediately getting them just completely rented out. And
Yeah.
renters are finding seeing a lot of value in those types of assets.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think like too, if you um like if you're in an area, a specific market, and you have some rentals in that market, I think building up a reputation as a fair landlord, right? That
Hmm.
responds to maintenance requests right away, that has fair rent, that deals with his renters or her renters fairly, right? Ethically, morally, you can build a solid reputation to where if you're building a property to rent or if you're rehabbing another property to rent, you don't even have to list them because now you've got almost like a waiting list of people because word of mouth gets around pretty quick. And
Yeah,
people then understand like, hey, this landlord has another property coming up, in a few months. If you're looking for a place to stay here in one of his or her units, right? So I bring that up because one of my investor friends is doing like student rentals in Galveston,
yeah,
of all places. And it's very, very competitive in Galveston, even
yeah.
for student rentals.
Hmm.
But every property that he rehabs, and he does like small multis, like anywhere from 2 to 4 units, every single one that he's rehabbed, before he's done with the rehab of each unit, it's already rented out. Like because of the reputation he's built as a landlord there at Galveston. And he's only been
Yeah.
doing this for about a year and a half, maybe two
Wow.
years. Yeah.
One question I wanted to ask you before, if there are no other questions, one question I have for you is about evictions. What is, and I think a lot of people are kind of, they seem to think that it's harder than it really is. Like, do
Mhm.
you have a process for evictions or,
Yeah, I mean, so I think for us, we got lucky, I think, with that one eviction that we had to do because they can get ugly, and they can take a long time. It just really depends on the person that's staying there that you're having to evict, like what their attitude about it is, And again, I think it all fell back on us as well because we were trying to communicate with this person, in a professional, cordial way, being respectful the entire time, even though they were giving us every single reason and excuse for not paying what they had to pay, right? But we didn't really give them any chances either. It was just more like, hey, if you're not paid up by this date, this is what's going to happen.
Mhm.
You basically just put a 3-day notice to vacate on their, to vacate the property. If they ignore that, then you can file a petition with the precinct court where the property is
Mhm.
located. This is Houston. I'm talking about Houston here. So you file a petition to evict there at the precinct court, and then they notify the renter that basically within like at least like about 21 days, they have to show up to court to basically plead their case, right?
Yeah.
If they don't show up to court, you get a default judgment, and then they basically have another 30 days, about 30 days to actually vacate the property, you know but they get delivered through certified mail. This is the default judgment. You have to get out by this date. And if they're not out by that date, the justice of the peace sends a constable over to basically put a 48-hour notice or a 24-hour notice to vacate at that point. And if
Mhm.
they don't vacate, you, the landlord, have to hire movers or have to have someone to move all of the contents out of the house to the curb. So
Wow.
that's kind of the process in a nutshell. Some people hire lawyers, really just kind of depending on the situation. We did it all ourselves for that particular client. And like I mentioned before, those people were just kind of in and out. They actually just, if you count the deposit that we kept, and the months of rent that they did pay, she really wasn't out a lot of cash,
Okay.
So yeah, so that one again, we were pretty lucky, but I've heard some horror stories of people just really dragging that process out long.
I think some of the horror stories that I'm aware of is because the landlord took too long to
Yeah,
respond,
you take
and they
too
didn't.
long, or you're not responding, you're not talking to these people, respectfully. Again, you feel disrespected because they're not paying the rent.
Yeah.
and they're not doing what they say they're going to do. They're not following the lease or whatever it is, but yeah, landlords can get themselves in trouble too.
Kirsten mentions a third party company for eviction, so that's probably is worth the money there. They can handle everything on there, so it's always a good resource to have.
Yeah.
Well, Alberto, appreciate your time. Appreciate everyone on the call. I see Sally and Richard and Christian and Ken's on here and Robert's on here. So appreciate you guys being on. This will be posted on YouTube in the next 24 hours. So make sure you're subscribed to Austin from Houston 12. Also, July happy hour, we're going to be at Pizza Lounge on the 20th. So that's the third Thursday. So come have some pizza and beer with us. Come
That's
hang
the
out.
17th. You mean July
This,
17th?
yeah, the third. Is that the 17th? I don't math. Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah. So,
Okay.
all right. Any last words, Berto?
No, man. I really enjoyed today's topic too. Like, I really enjoyed this one. Hopefully, the people that look at the video can get some tips out of this, man.
Absolutely. Next week, we're going to be analyzing a deal. So if you have a deal you want us to look at, send it our way. If not, we'll be pulling something up and we'll be ready for y'all. Have a great week. Bye.
Awesome, man. Bye.